talking primarily about DAOs. We've certainly given a lot of love to NFTs over the previous weeks, but I thought it would be time to talk about DAOs. I think it's an important part of the space. And I just wanted to start by saying that a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. And I think it's easiest to understand what DAO means if you take those letters backwards. Organization, it's a group of people that have decided to do something together. Autonomous means that it's based on a smart contract, and that once that smart contract is built, different things in the DAO happen automatically based on the conditions that you've set up in the smart contract. And decentralized means that it's not a typical hierarchical structure like Eric was talking about. This is a different way of doing business where everybody in the organization has the ability to impact the organization, and great ideas and power can come from anywhere. Now, usually the way that you become involved in a DAO is you have ownership of a token. And usually the DAO is only as strong as the smart contract that it is built upon. And so I thought I would start by throwing it open to you guys to talk about the kinds of smart contracts that DAOs are built upon, how you know if that smart contract makes any sense, and if you can't figure it out, where you find that out. So I thought that would be a good place to begin.
Yeah, I just wanted to before we talk about smart contracts and technology type stuff, I wanted to clarify a little bit for the audience. The word autonomous, it really means having the freedom to govern oneself or to control one's own affairs, right? So this organization that the DAO represents, the reason why it's autonomous is because it can make up its own mind about what to do without really any external influence or external forces dictating to it what it wants to do. And this is, I think, a very important part of the DAO and what gives the DAO such great attractiveness. Because if you look at if you look at a DAO, really, it's like a corporation. It has both functions of a corporation in terms of beneficial ownership and control of the work that the organization does. But unlike a corporation, it doesn't have any of the constraints of government because it isn't a legal entity. It doesn't actually exist as far as any sovereign is concerned. So all of the burdens of reporting and compliance and taxation and all the prohibitions that a corporation typically has to deal with, the DAOs don't have, right? And that makes them super, super competitive with the corporation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great question about, okay, so it lives in the ether, right? And it can do whatever it wants to do, but as soon as it touches the real world, then how does it, comply? And that's kind of an open question, but in principle, we start with having tools. And the DAO is a tool. It's a way by which a bunch of people can come together and make decisions about how to allocate capital towards labor, and gives them the mechanism to actually receive the reward without even knowing each other, without any government being able to know who is involved in this DAO, right? Um, so once we have the tool, how we apply that tool and how does that play in the real world, that stuff is still pretty open. But I just wanted to make that short introduction.
I
Well,
love
that's
that. Can I
Go ahead.
plus that?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Adrian.
So how people think about democracy, right? How they assume our democracy works is actually closer to how a DAO works than how our real government works. We're a representative democracy, which means we're not a direct democracy. So a DAO is more of a direct democracy. I love the anonymous piece of it in that it isn't a popularity contest so much because depending on what your ownership is, that's your voting percentage, your weight. You're literally voting with your wallet, right? And then the other piece of it is, if you think about a DAO structured properly, think of it like homeowners association CC&Rs. A lot of people are familiar with those. Covenants, constriction, whatever that stands for, restrictions. But the idea is, if you guys have decided that you're going to build something and you're not going to allow trampolines and basketball hoops, then that's literally not allowed unless the entire community decides to change it. So that's what you really want to look at, the white paper, and then you want to make sure that the audit is in compliance with what the white paper says it is. That's one of the biggest issues that I've seen, is the white paper's brilliant, laid out fabulous, but the smart contract doesn't actually have all of the capabilities that the white paper thinks it does. And that's where sometimes we get into trouble with DAOs.
Adrian, can you tell people what a white paper is? If we have some
Yes.
new folks, they may not know.
Sure. So a white paper is basically a business plan that substitutes the financial remuneration of investors section with a tokenomics section that explains what the token does, how it is allocated, who gets what and when, and what the growth strategy is to promote the token or the utility of the token. But otherwise, it is basically a business plan with a roadmap with what it does, who it serves, what the purpose is, and who it benefits.
Great. And you were talking about democracy in the sense of the power structure in the DAO. And one of the big advantages of DAOs is that it solves the principal agent dilemma, right? Because often the people who, in a corporation, often the people who are charged with making decisions may not have the same interests as the people who own stock in the corporation and
Yes.
may focus more on their self interest. So I wonder if you and Eric and the folks at large could talk about that piece of the DAO.
Yeah,
Well,
I love that point, and
that is so good.
I think you do a better job explaining things, so I'll let you go. But that I'll come back to it.
So that is exactly the whole point of a DAO. When you do have a corporation, you're going to find that they sometimes make deals that end up making their bonuses larger, but shareholder dividends less. So they're not in alignment. With a DAO, everything is in alignment because there are no elected people who get more. You literally you may have people who stake earning higher rewards than those who don't stake, but that's because they've done something. You may have people who are mining, and they have enough tokens that they are running a master node, but that's because they've invested and put their money where their mouth is, right? So it's very egalitarian, if that's the right word. It's everything is, this is what you have to do to get this. There's no popularity. There's no backroom deals. It's super clean. And the other piece of it is, you might have these anonymous people who are owners. You don't know who to go bribe to get a vote. So the special interest lobbyists just ignore the DAOs because they don't really have a lot of ways to sway them. And then the only other way to do it is just to buy it up and get a 51%, and then you can take over. So that's an issue. So I think one of the cleanest things with a DAO is to make sure that there can be no one entity holding a certain number, like to make sure that it's super distributed. That to me, that's the safety of a DAO, is the larger the number of people who are token holders and participants, the more democratic the entire process will be.
Adrian, I definitely want to come back to that, but I want to give Eric a chance to pipe in because I know this is important to him.
Um, yeah, I like to talk about how the founders, the framers of the Constitution in the United States, really sort of made a mistake because they had the opportunity to implement a platonic democracy, but the bottom line was they just didn't trust the people. They felt that people were short-sighted, which they are, and that they run in groups, and that like a bunch of lemmings, they were just going to run off the cliffs. And so their solution to that was we need the elders. We need a group of mature, older men who've had a chance to see life, to make decisions. And so we're going to set them up as representatives, right? You get to vote for a person, not an issue, and then this person, based on an assessment of what everybody in his audience seems to want, then thinks about it and says, well, yes, or maybe no, right? And I think that maybe there's some value to that elitism and the notion that the crowd is really incapable of governing itself. But one thing that, if you're building a nation, it's one thing. If you're building an organization, it's a much smaller thing, and the audience is much better curated. So if an organization goes bust because everyone inside the organization makes the wrong choices, then that just means that everyone who made the wrong choices learns, right? And it's just the organization that crashes, not a great big deal. It's not a whole nation that crashes. So what I really love about the DAOs is that they're platonic democracies, right? It means that you don't have those layers and layers of corruption that that naturally evolve when you give people power over stuff. The power that I have is the power to choose for myself. That's it. I'm not choosing for anybody else, and therefore I'm no more powerful than my peer, right? And so that really is an anti-corruption mechanism, and I think it's also a power of the wisdom of the crowd mechanism. I think that we've seen from predictions markets that some people do understand and know stuff better, right? And the predictions markets actually are mechanisms that allow the compensation of better knowledge. And I think eventually DAOs will sort of prove that point. And the other issue that I wanted to mention too is that, if you have a bunch of guys that get together and say, we think that there's a great opportunity in making electric cars, or making, this or that widget, and they put together a DAO and they finance it, right? So okay, that's all good mechanism. The question is now, how does the car actually get made? And it may be that in some decentralized way, if you're going to make a car, you need wheels, and you need seats, and you need things, right? And these things get sourced from different uh, places. So it may very well be that all of those suppliers really end up as DAOs, right? Where the DAOs have an actual factory and have people that work for them, and those people get paid because they each created a DAO. So at the lowest level, as a plain worker, as a dude who just sits and shows up and moves and does something useful, I could have a DAO represent me, and I could get paid through the DAO, and therefore extract myself away from the entire taxing and compliance and all of the infrastructure that really makes us so non-free today, right? And I think that's the second that I really like.
That really leads me to my next point. But before we get there, I want to remind everyone in the room that this is really your session, and there is no question too basic. We would love to hear your questions, and just raise your hand if you have one. Um, I I have heard a lot in the technology space over the last 10 or 15 years about trustless technologies. And a lot of people talk about a DAO as a trustless technology. And I wonder if any of you would like to comment on that idea.
I think it's naive and hopeful and awesome at the same time. I mean, this idea of trustless, I trust math, right? But again, what I've always said before about blockchain, it's an unfuckwithable ledger of what actually happened. But a human being, for the most part, is kicking off a transaction. You can have smart contracts that are basically like, okay, well, this sensor said that this light bulb is out and the inventory says there isn't one in stock. So I'm going to go order one and it's going to come in. But, at some point, somebody programmed that to say, check and see if the light bulb's out. If you program or you put in or you put something in that's fraudulent, like especially what we see in the NFT markets, where somebody will take a Canva, free, royalty free picture and then mint it and try and sell it for $500 as an NFT, that's not really legitimate. So garbage in, garbage out. And the blockchain doesn't necessarily prevent falsehoods, right? It promotes trust. And you can be certain and sure that what is happening is what you think is happening, but that doesn't mean that what is happening is legal or legitimate. So that's the only part of Trustless that I worry about in this vernacular with consumers in a society where we have programmed them that they are never at fault and someone else is always to blame. This whole idea of trustless and personal responsibility and self-reliance, I think we need to push that farther back into society, that my word is my bond and a handshake is a contract, before they really understand trustless and permanent blockchain transactions.
I have a slightly different take on that, which is that trustless. The the reason, I mean, trust is at the core of human activity, right? Everything we do pretty much ends up in a trade or in interaction with other human beings. And every time that we touch another human being, we have to have some degree of trust. If I give you something and you promise me that you'll actually give it to me, etc. And I think that what has been clear to many, and has become very clear most recently, is that everyone is not only corruptible but has turned out to be utterly corrupt, right? So people lie, they cook the books, they enhance the truth or whatever, right? And they never do the right thing. So what does trustless mean? It means that to the extent that functionality lives in the blockchain, I can review the source code and say, oh, this is the logic. And that logic isn't going to change. And that logic is guaranteed by the blockchain. And that logic has no self-interest. It is never going to lie to me. It is never going to take my stuff because it has nowhere to go with it. It isn't the thing, right? And um, so maybe, there's the issues of the touch points again. We're going to keep coming into that issue, for the next number of years. How does blockchain actually touch the real world? And I think that Internet of Things, for example, is going to go a long way towards establishing that nexus between blockchain and the real world, where you take people out about decisions about the world, right? If you have some sensor that is just sitting there emitting a signal every so often. Maybe it's a temperature or a pressure or something. And there are well established mechanisms for delivery of that signal in an encrypted way and all this kind of stuff, right? So that you can have certainty that that data is correct. Well, okay, great. Was this package delivered? That kind of thing. So, so I think it's that there's a transitionary period here. We have the basic construct for trustlessness. We just don't have any good way right now, and we're exploring that, to bind that mechanism to the real world.
Yuri, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Welcome back, by the way. Oh,
Okay, I
guess
want
not.
to just introduce Alexandra for a minute. She is
Okay.
an attorney in this space. I invited her to join us because we are discussing legal matters and none of us are attorneys, and I thought she'd be a great addition. So, Alexandra, you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
She is the best attorney in blockchain, by the way, just to preface that. The
Thank you,
absolute
Yuri.
best, most knowledgeable, and sassy, too. She will tell you when somebody's doing something wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, so I worked at the SEC. I was an attorney there, and then I worked at one of those big giant international firms in their New York and Chicago offices. I headed a practice in LA, and then I had my own practice for several years. Then I started a biotech and an affiliated consumer product company. I exited, and I moved into blockchain around 2016. I've been in here for a while, and currently actually working on there was a request for a book from a publisher on DeFi. So now I'm doing that book proposal literally as we speak. So, but so I just advise companies on legal strategy and operations. But so I was actually looking at the Gensler testimony today and what it holds for crypto and the implications. I don't know if you've talked about it or if that's of interest. I think it's a very interesting bit of testimony, and you can see a little bit about what he wants to do in the future. I know that there are some people who are drawing a lot of implications from other um, from what the senators asked and things like that. So he testified before the banking committee. And I don't know that I would necessarily draw anything from those discussions simply because those senators are not really in a position to do anything about it. They're just asking questions. So really the only thing that matters is what did Gensler say about it, because he's in a position to actually implement what he's thinking about. So I'm happy to talk about that. If you're not interested in talking about that, that's fine. It's just something that is current, is literally happened this morning.
Oh, please, 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 please. I definitely, well, you know
We
me.
do want it.
I'm a
Thank you.
geek.
Okay.
I want to.
So there's a lot of sort of hidden stuff in here. This is the one thing that I think is most difficult, I think, about Gary Gensler is you have to know so much background about what he's saying and the issues that might be implicated, because they have a lot of innocuous statements that actually have huge amounts of meaning, but only if you know what he's talking about, right? So they look like very simple things, but you can tell that he's targeting specific companies or practices. And you can even see that when he talked to the European Commission, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, when they had this whole veiled conversation about, you know, if we were like, it was essentially asking, if I don't remember the language because it was so obscure, but it was essentially if we take on a joint oversight role and start doing international securities regulations and enforcement, should we use the US's rule? And Gensler said, and again, it's a very veiled format, but his meaning was, like, are the rules strong enough? And he said, they're strong. Like, yes, please use my rules. But he's going to look for clarification, which means he wants more. He wants more power. So, so kind of keeping that in mind, which is weird that it's like you need an interpreter. But if you kind of know, if you know the background, it's actually pretty clear what he's talking about. So some of the things that he talks about, he has 4 main areas that he talks about in his testimony. One is market structure, predictive data analytics, issuers and issuer disclosure, and funds and investment management. And he kind of crosses all of those in various different discussions. The first one, he talks about the Treasury and the solidity of the Treasury and of U.S. currency. And he talks about how it needs to be more efficient to save money and more resilient, and that it's a risk-free asset. So all of this is sort of while he's then he says that he wants to. I've asked staff to reconsider some initiatives on Treasury trading platforms to level the playing field, and then all the players in the market are registered as dealers with the SEC. So this is a couple of things. This is a little bit talking about how important the currency is, because the next issue he's going to be coming up with is CBDCs, which are central bank depository currency, or digital currency, sorry. And that is actually going to come partly, according to him, and it's true, it's likely true, like partly under the purview of the SEC, to the extent that people who are dealing with those have to be registered as dealers with the SEC. So he's definitely advocating for CBDCs over, for example, what the Fed discusses, like stable coins, right? Because that's really the competitor. It's not Bitcoin or anything like that. That's a false argument from people who honestly just don't understand currency and monetary policy. There are a few things that that this industry that I love and am very deeply enmeshed in, but there are a few things that they consistently just get wrong, and it's just because they take a little tiny nugget of fact and turn it into a completely false representation of the world, and that becomes problematic when policies in the blockchain industry start being formed to utilize things in ways that they were never intended to utilize. Bitcoin is not a currency. It cannot be a currency. It would be a terrible idea for it to be a currency. And we're going to see some of what has happened as a result coming from El Salvador and to some extent the Ukraine, although the Ukraine's adoption seems to be much smoother than El Salvador's. Okay, so here with respect to what we're talking about with crypto, what he's talking about is essentially that that we need to deal, like anybody who's dealing with any of these things on treasury trading platforms, so anything with CBDCs and other treasury trading implements have to be registered. So then he talks about the non-treasury fixed income markets. That's the bond market. It's a huge market, but right now that isn't necessarily implicated at all with the crypto market or blockchain. So, and he gives very little time to it, and we move on from there. So equity market structure. So he talks about actually the history of what happens, like how the markets developed and how the rules developed. And he recognizes that the rules that were brought in even like 16 years ago are no longer applicable or no longer protective, given the way that the markets now exist. Like, we don't have broker dealers. I have said this many times. All these laws right now are predicated on a system that no longer exists. They're all based on regulated individuals that are intermediaries that have a vast amount of knowledge that is required and that have fiduciary and regulatory obligation to tell you the truth, to understand your risk profile, and to make sure that you understand the full implications of what you're doing. We don't have that anymore. You can directly invest in the market, and nothing has taken the place of that informational segment. So what's developed instead is a bunch of walls. And we need gates. We don't need walls, right? We need gates and gatekeepers, and that doesn't have to be a person as much as it needs to be information that is verifiable, that is true, it's balanced, and represents fully risks and benefits of various decisions that you can make within the crypto community, and not just in crypto, but in securities as a whole. What has happened instead is that people who have greater amounts of knowledge or greater amounts of funds are permitted into this area of securities and investing, and others without those are denied access, and that just separates the wealthy and the poor even more. So that's a very big issue, and he's at least acknowledging that that these rules, they need to be, and this is what he says, freshened up to ensure that equity marks reflect our mission and are as efficient and competitive as they could be.
That's what Tim Draper and I discussed a couple of years ago. My grandpa was really, really smart, like super smart, but he was a postman. So he wasn't an accredited investor. And so he was very limited. He made his money investing in CDs, like nothing, right? 4%, 12%, nothing. So I came up with this idea of a sophisticated investor, which would be like a baby Series 7, but it would mean that you could function as an accredited investor because you had the intelligence. So that's something that we are trying to push through.
That actually already exists. There is a sophisticated investor language that was modified into the Accredited Investor Act, and if you've taken particular series or what they call qualified tests,
that's
yeah,
the whole
it doesn't
point.
regard your.
You can't just take the Series 63, which is what you can take without a sponsor. I've tried to take it. You can't take it. It's like I have not figured out. FINRA has not made it easy to just go apply to be a sophisticated investor. register for your test, take your test, now you're accredited. It is so muddy, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, they said that they're coming out with a list of approved tests, and really the point is that it actually isn't about intelligence; it's about education. I think that there's an assumption that somehow people who have more money are smarter or more capable, but really all it means is that they theoretically have money that they can afford to lose. It doesn't mean that they understand what they're doing any better. It's just that they won't cause a drain on welfare systems if they lose all of their money.
You
And
mean they were?
incidentally, in that regard,
Oh,
I'm
you
sorry,
mean
go
they
ahead.
were born on third and think they hit a triple?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I don't know why anybody thinks Kylie Jenner is anything special. Like, whatever, it's so easy to make $1 billion on when you start with 600 million, right? You could put it in a bank and make more than that in a year. So the fact that she's a billionaire and it took her this much time, I'm like, damn, you suck. You could actually do so much more. But aside from that, it's yes, for those of us who weren't smart enough to be born trust fund babies, we're already at a disadvantage. And the laws that are in place right now don't actually facilitate any sort of socioeconomic growth, which is that is the foundational principle of America. That is the entire reason we didn't adopt the peerage system, even though we will most admit that everybody in the US is fascinated with people who have titles. But the reason we didn't take it is because there's this fundamental principle of socioeconomic growth. And that can happen. Now, of course, it was only white men they considered this, but the idea was you could come in as an indentured servant and then become a farmer. And if you went into the military, then you could have power within your state. So yes, it's sexist and it's racist and it's all other bad ists, but the fundamental principle that you didn't have to be born into a social position to gain it, or you didn't have to be born into an economic position to gain it. It was radically different from anything that existed in the world, and it's one of the reasons why people wanted to shoot down Alexander Hamilton's plan. And all of this is completely, aside from it. But there are a lot of people who believed that, no, people who are the owners are the owners, people who are the workers are the workers. We don't combine, and they loved this feudalist idea that was not something that came from, this more progressive thought of, no, it's better for the country if everybody gets to participate. So,
Alexandra, let me bring it back to the DAO, which is what we're discussing today. And I'm glad you're here talking about Gensler's testimony. When you talk through it, so far I got the stable coins on the DeFi spectrum are affected, you're going to be affected. What about DEXs? What about all the other DeFi apps?
Yeah. There's a lot. There's more on that. So here we're talking about the next thing he talks about is fragmentation among trading platforms and the need for transparency, and the fact that half of the volume of securities is transacted in dark pools, which we've already known has been an issue. Most people will do almost all of their transactions in dark pools, which means you see the outcome of those transactions. But like, if you guys remember AMC and GameStop, where they were doing that short squeeze, what a short squeeze is really is just a pump and dump inside a short position. And that only happens if you know that a short position is pending. That's why most people who have big, giant transactions that are happening try to do it off market, so that people can't manipulate the market and force them into a position that they don't want to be in. Okay, so for that, he's just saying that he says we need to stop doing that, and we also need, and he takes a specific statement regarding payment of for order flow and exchange rebates have a conflict of interest. That's Robinhood. So he's attacking it, saying that I think regulation is going to come, and the conflict of interest. When you have a conflict of interest, then you either have to waive it, which wouldn't be waivable, or you have to eliminate it, which means Robinhood may not be able to exist in its current form. Okay, so the next thing is security-based swaps. So swaps and trades, this is the beginning of dealing with the crypto markets, where they're talking about the security-based swap execution facilities and the CFTC rules regarding swap execution facilities, how applicable are they on security-based swaps, and because if these tokens are securities and they work on Uniswap or something like that, that would technically be a security-based swap. So they're looking at using the potentially the CFTC rules and putting them in giving them a stronger place within the SEC, and then also talking about being able to see aggregate positions. So mandated disclosure for positions in security-based swaps and related securities. He cites Archegos, that family office that crashed. But if you think about it, this is also the extension of what the counterparty disclosure rule, which is something that's on the table right now. Weirdly, I thought it would go away, but it clearly did not, because it was an end of Trump administration proposal, but it's still there. And that is the idea that both parties to a swap must be identified. And here it's either like in individual form or in the aggregate. So if you're doing a bunch of different swaps, and you have to identify these are the parties that are doing like X volume of swaps. And how would that work within the automated systems of the swaps of indexes of DeFi? They wouldn't. You can't. I don't know how that would happen, because the ability to confirm assets. I mean, the only thing they could do, possibly, is just mandate KYC for anything that goes through there, KYC AML. So all of the transactions on that marketplace are through parties that have been KYC'd, so are likely accredited investors if they're private, and AML, so likely they are not dealing with money laundering. So
Question. I can launch a DEX in 5 minutes in cyberspace or Iceland or someplace that won't take it down. How can they stop that? I mean, there's no way to stop this. The only way to stop things is when it goes back to fiat, into banking.
Here's what they have done, and this is what they're doing now for like the Uniswap investigation. And you mentioned DAOs. The first thing that they do is they go after the founder developers. And then what they're going to do, and they haven't expressly said this, but this is the only natural result, is they go after any governance token holder. That's what's going to happen with DAOs, by the way, which means and the problem is, if your DAO is not organized in some manner that has liability protection, so you're not like an LLC or a corporation or whatever, you're just a group of people, you don't know each other, and you just get together on a handshake. The problem with this is that if there's any liability at all, you're going to be considered a partnership. So you're in partnership with a bunch of people who don't know each other. What does that mean? That means that any liability is imputed to you. So somebody in another country doing in some other area, like they did something that is they did something that was involving money laundering, then the liability for that could be imputed to every single partner. This is why partnerships don't exist anymore. They're all like limited liability partnerships, or they're corporations, or PCs. Depending on what exactly the state allows based on your profession and things like that. The PC is professional corporation. So if you are not organized correctly, and this is just what's happening now, the problem is they will assume that you're part of it until you prove that you're not. How do you prove you're not part of a DAO? That's interesting. I don't know. If you have a governance token, technically you have the ability to act as part of that.
So Alexandra,
You know what?
I have a little question, because
Eric, before we go forward, I wanted to have Carlos introduce himself, and also Yuri had a question, and then we can swing back around. Okay, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, pleasure to meet everybody. Sorry I'm late today. Hi, my name is Carlos Rodriguez. I am an executive conference producer in the fintech, as well as IT, finance, and blockchain space, digital assets. I'm also now touching AI, just because I do think that it is the future, and it will be major implications within everything that we touch, including DAOs, NFTs, etc. I'm also an avid NFT collector. I'm a hardcore Vivi fan, so I'm really into comic books right now. And I'm really excited to see the amazing Spider-Man continue to climb, and the floor keeps on going up on Marvel Comics #1. Literally in the last month, I purchased it for 2K, and now it's already at 16K. So we're seeing great results there. So long story short, here to just kind of share my experience and how you can ultimately take advantage of some trends right now in the system. Ultimately, I work directly with executives and startups, and I interconnect Fortune 500 companies with startups and work with them as well.
Thanks, Carlos. And you've waited very patiently. I wanted to let you hop in for a minute.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good day, everyone. And I don't want to interrupt Alexander's train of thought, which is, as always, really, really important and amazing. Just to want to get back for a second to what Adrian has said earlier about believing in math and so trusting math and how that would work in DAO's case. Just it's important to remember that math is abstract, right? Is an abstraction, and then you have to apply it in the real world. And when you apply it, other stuff happens. Like today, it happened with Solana, as you probably all know, or like Solana, the whole blockchain has been down for like a few hours, and so the same thing can happen and probably will happen to DAOs and other things. So basically, you can trust in a DAO, you can trust in mathematics, in algorithms, whatever, but it won't save you if the network is down. And unfortunately, I'm afraid this will happen more and more often because, with all Internet of Things, all those devices, like millions and then billions of them, are not so many of them are protected, and we see like more and more of the attacks that are performed by your fridge. Weird things, your TV, your fridge, all those things soon will and not soon. Today they are part of like large scale denial of service DDoS attacks, and I'm afraid soon, like today, they took down the whole Solana blockchain, which is like really large, not really large technically, financially it's large, right? And what will happen tomorrow? So this just one thing to remember, that you have not to forget about this. I'm done speaking.
Thank you for that point, Yuri. That's a really interesting take on things, and I wanted to circle back to Eric, and I know I know you had something you wanted to share, Eric, and you wanted to jump in. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Alexandra's perspective on this idea that the solution to enforcement is going after the founders or the developers. This is clearly what they did with Ether Delta. Ether Delta was a DEX, and the SEC found it to be in violation of US law. And since it's a DEX, you can't shut it down. You can't destroy the smart contract or destroy the entire Ethereum network to shut it down. So what they did was they figured out who wrote it, and they showed up at their doorstep with guns, and they said, "We have a box for you. You will shut this thing down, and you'll pay a fine, or else we'll put you in a box." Right? And okay, so that worked. That worked relatively well. But what it really does is it causes um, it adds a level of consideration for those who are building software and or deploying software, which becomes a little hard to tell, um, to do a Satoshi, right? So Satoshi knew that if he delivered this thing to the world as a company and with his name attached, that they would just come and kill him. And so he took a great deal of trouble to hide his tracks. And the Bitcoin network is different than every other network in the crypto space in that it doesn't have attribution. It doesn't have a set of founders. It doesn't have anyone that you can point to and say, "Hey, you did this," right? And given the public stance of the SEC that they're just going to come after the founders, that is all the more reason to create DAOs, right? That means that if you want to create a If you want to create a piece of software on the blockchain and release it, you're going to do so through a DAO, so that you can retain anonymity. And there's a whole lot of proof of burden, or burden of proof kind of thing, right? Like Alexandra was talking about, how do I prove that I'm not in a DAO? And also, so that's one sort of thought that I have for Alexandra. We're all basically going to go underground then, as a function of that statement. And my other question for her is, this idea that the United States government can simply classify or reclassify anyone that they want in the world, and make them, and basically point the guns at them. For example, the way that they do it with corporations, where if 25% or more, I can't remember the number now, but if some percentage of the corporation is owned by American entities, that corporation, even though it's an offshore corporation, then becomes an American company. Well, okay, they can do that. The U.S. can do that, and they can make any rules as they like, right? The question becomes enforcement. So if you're going to consider every DAO a partnership, and you're going to make every participating member, sort of stake, token holder, a liable for the acts of other token holders, okay, fine. um, you can make that rule, but how are you going to enforce it? You don't even know who the people are. You don't have any means of determining who is actually holding the tokens and who is voting in the DAO as a function of those tokens, right? So pretty quickly it gets to the point where, sure, you can make up any rules that you like, but what is the value of the rule if you cannot enforce it, right? And so those are my two questions for Alexander.
Okay, I'm not sure. I specifically have the two questions. One is, what is the value of making rules if you can enforce it? And I suppose, is this not going to force software developers underground? Are those the two
Correct.
questions? Okay.
That's a natural conclusion.
Right. So is this going to support software? So I'm not advocating or not advocating any of these issues. I'm just reporting them and explaining them. But is this going to force software developers underground? They don't care. Honestly, they don't care. They don't care if that's what happens. There are tracks. There are, like, the way that they do investigations. The SEC has now more power than it has ever had in its history, including after 1933, when the first act came out. And the way that they're doing enforcement now is using the FBI, and you would not believe what small tangential things have made U.S. jurisdiction possible. Like, a founder's account that wasn't even a business account in a bank in the U.S. An offer that wasn't accepted to a U.S. citizen, registering your domain name with a U.S. company, like all sorts of very, very, very loose things that ordinarily would never justify U.S. jurisdiction now work. And the other thing is, the way that they're doing the investigations is you have now FBI agents and others who are enmeshed in the underground, Tor culture and in blockchain. And it started early, like, when Silk Road was still around. But they're there, and that is one of the ways that they get a lot of the intelligence, is because there are operatives basically all over blockchain. The second thing to note about that is that the anonymity isn't as secure as one would think, unfortunately. So this is what happened with Coinbase. I think it was 2016. Coinbase in 2016. So for 2015. I think 50 people registered that or listed the amount of gains that they had in crypto. And the IRS was like, what the hell? We read the news too. We know that there's more than 50 people in this space. And the same thing happened again in 2016. And so what the IRS did is went to Coinbase and said, open up your list of wallets and all your KYC data. And they're like, no. And the IRS said, okay, do it, or we will audit you now and every year forever. And we will we'll seize your assets and freeze them, and you won't be able to operate at all. And they were like, okay, we'll do it. And that is how they actually started to catch a bunch of the companies that are part of the 2016, 2017 crypto interface. But also, they required a bunch of people to start listing their gains as capital gains because they identified the people and connected them to wallets. So the next thing they did is go through hedge funds and things like that. So the truth is that they have methods of finding people that are not ways that are even remotely legal for general citizens or for citizens overseas. Some countries actually keep a huge amount of data, and the U.S. generally has access to it. And then the other thing that we've seen recently is that the U.S. is now operating in tandem with a bunch of different countries, which we saw in execution of Binance, the action against Binance. And it's shocking because financial issues and financial crime has never before, to my knowledge, resulted in combined efforts between countries. So generally speaking, for traditional crime, I don't know what you'd call it, like it doesn't have to be violent crime, but for criminals, generally speaking, which is like drugs and sex trafficking and all that stuff. There's a mutual interest in making sure that criminals have no safe haven, because there is nothing that would prevent a particular criminal from committing crimes in a different jurisdiction. However, for financial crimes, you often have people who contribute generously to a group in power or to the government of a sheltering nation, and that's how many nations that tend to be autocratic, but that's how many nations gained a ton of wealth, is that they would harbor these financial criminals, along with the statement that if you commit crime here, I'm extraditing you. So they could be made to be to act in a more white hat way.
A quick
So
question before we only have like 2 minutes left.
I'm sorry. This is
this can take
it's
a
a
long
huge
time.
topic, and I should not have brought it here. I'm really
No worries. I think the one thing I just want to address is that there is a Wyoming DAO law, and it does protect basically the members of the DAO. It gives them limited liability for the shareholders and members of the DAO. So that is sort of a step in the right direction.
Unless they misbehave.
Okay.
Well,
There's
also,
a caveat that says
just
if Wyoming says they misbehave, then they can remove that limited liability and treat it like a partner.
And interestingly enough, Coinbase is actually getting a lot of pressure from the SEC right now to disclose their lending, the people who are currently on their lending platform. So just a heads up, that's definitely something to watch.
So what this tells me is we have lots of topics for conversation again next week at our 10 a.m. on Tuesday talk. I would really appreciate it if you would all show our tremendous panel some love by following them, and also go to infiom.com where you can join our mailing list and you will learn about this clubhouse, the clubhouse we have every Wednesday at 1:30, talking about creating unicorns in the DAO. And also you can go to our virtual presentation at 12:30 on Wednesdays and meet some phenomenal up and coming companies in the space. So just go to infiom.com and join the mailing list there. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. This was a fascinating conversation today, and I look forward to talking again next week.
Yeah, and Alexandra is going to be back tomorrow at 1:30 on our Create Unicorns panel. So is Adrian and Jeanette and everyone on this panel.
And
so
did you need another company for tomorrow? You had sent me a message.
We actually have 4 now confirmed. We usually try to keep it at 4, otherwise it goes over the hour. And then, but thank you. Maybe next time, Adrian, for the next one. So we always look for innovative companies. So if you want to present, shoot us a note. I'm Mariana at Infiom.com. You can also, on our website, Infiom.com, you can apply to speak and present your company at our, thanks for reminding me, Adrian. So tomorrow, 12:30, you can sign up for that presentation on Eventbrite. And then we follow up with the discussion in the clubhouse. And I learned so much today. Thank you, Jeanette, for organizing this, and everyone, all of our speakers. It was a really learning experience for me. So thank you all.
Have a great day.
See you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Alexandra.